Bear with me when I was asked to do this. I looked back at this podium. I said, "What? You want me to come up and say a few words?" I said, "Let me think about it a couple of days." And I got back to Sister Robin. So I want to thank the Mosque and Sister Robin and Imam with Deen, Mohammed for this opportunity to come before you all today. The topic that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, and feel free to make comments or ask questions, or if you are so led to do so. The talk that I'm going to have for today is the color of music, the unique perspective of the African American voice. I intend to show the correlation of the Africans and the Europeans finding themselves on a new landscape of the North American continent, very hostile and dangerous environment, and yet this environment was full of unimaginable beauty. At the same time, hostile, extremely dangerous, and at the same time, this new world was filled with unimaginable beauty of the spirit, beauty of the land. Wow. With this landscape in front of them, these two groups of people came to America. There were others, but these two groups, I'm focusing on these two groups of people, were here in America, and they were able to give America its only original music. I'll explain how that happened a little later as I continue on with the talk. We're not forgetting about the Native Americans who were already here, the natives, or any other groups who found themselves here as well. But again, for the purpose of my talk this afternoon, I'm just going to focus on our African ancestors and the Europeans. Now, starting first with our African ancestors, I want to say that I did say it was hostile and dangerous and all of that. They were kidnapped. Our African ancestors were kidnapped, forced, and sold into slavery. And history now reveals that many of them to have been Muslims. In fact, I've also heard and learned that the people who were doing this, kidnapping our ancestors and forcing them into slavery, when they learned that some of the Africans may have been Christians, because isn't it odd that the slave trade was supposed to have been believers in Christianity and Christian people? But we know there's a backstory to that too, as to why they felt that it was okay to go over and kidnap the Africans, and those that weren't kidnapped were sold into slavery. So when they found that some of the Africans were slaves, were Christians, they made efforts to not get Christian Africans and put them on slave ships bound for America. So our African ancestors who did wind up on those slave ships were treated in a very horrific and inhumane way. And we know what the purpose of that was. So please bear with me as I go through this historical talk with you, this historical journey. We know why that was. They were treated in a horrific, inhumane way to strip them completely of their humanity and reduce them to beasts of burden. And even worse, they wanted to make them mental slaves for generations to come. Anybody ever heard of the Willie Lynch letter? Anybody ever heard of that? Okay. Now, some people say it's a real letter. Some people say it's not a real letter. But we know that in that letter, it's supposed to be documented of how to break a person's humanity and keep them a slave for generations and generations. A mental slave, even if the chains are broken, for generations to come. Pit the old against the young, the fair complected against the darker complected. Fill them with fear and let them see you as their only savior. And they did that in a few ways that we already know about. In human history, this was the worst form of slavery forced on any people. Now, when some of our people were sold into slavery, they didn't. The people who sold them into slavery didn't think it was going to be exactly what it turned out to be. But this was the worst form of slavery forced on any people at all. And at this time, you see the piano over there. So this time I want to share with you a song, a spiritual. So bear with me. I'm going to just move my little step. If I don't drop anything. Let's see. Okay. This goes with me, right? Okay. All right, just bear with me. And I want to share this spiritual with you. You know, I'll just, mosey on over there. I don't have a Fitbit. I don't believe in a Fitbit. So I'm not counting steps. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I'm alone, waiting from home. Wow. The color of music. If I were to put a color to that song, that rendition of Motherless Child, I think it would have to be like dark, gray. And when I say the color of music, you know that I'm really speaking about the emotional and spiritual place that the human person is in. The emotional place, the spiritual place they're in. So a song like that, when our ancestors were brought over to this land, had to have them feeling despair, hopelessness. Their families were broken. They never thought they would see their loved ones again. Now this spiritual, in fact, when they were first written, they weren't called spirituals. As time went on, there was hope. Our people couldn't give up because we would not be here, frankly. And there is, in unspeakable horror and despair, Allah is closer than the jugular vein. But when the spirituals first came, they were called sorrow songs. And then gradually they became known as spirituals. Wow. So, coming from that type of hostile, danger, despair, hopeless of our African ancestors who were brought to this country, New World, and enslaved, let's take a look at the Europeans. They came to America as indentured slaves, and we know that indentured slaves mean they could serve their time and work out their time, and they'd be free. They came to America as indentured slaves, curiosity seekers, adventurers, entrepreneurs, and undesirables from prisons. They brought with them their language, religion, music, customs, and for the most part, even though this was a hostile and dangerous land, they were able to move about as free people. But remember, not so for our ancestors who were stripped, our ancestors who were stripped of their language, their religion, their music, their customs, and they certainly could not move about as free people. Wow. But I'm so glad that they know. Even if they didn't know, sometimes you can feel something down deep in your soul. You know it's real, and sometimes you may not quite understand why things are the way they are, but you just know, because I believe Allah put it in your human spirit to know that it's not going to be like this always. So we know that they planned, those who thought they could take advantage of this situation with our ancestors and other peoples who came to this country. They planned, and Allah plans, and Allah is always the best of planners. So at this point, I'd like to introduce to you a European. His name was Antoine Dvorak. He was a Czechoslovakian and composer. And after coming to America, he became interested in Native American music and African American spirituals. He was commissioned to come over here to be director of the American Conservatory of Music. So while he was on his post, while he was director of the National Conservatory of Music, he met an African American. Allah's in this all the way. He met an African American student whose name was Harry T. Burleigh. Burleigh. Harry T. Burleigh sang traditional spirituals to Antoine Dvorak. And he was so moved, this composer, Antoine Dvorak, was so moved by this student's rendition of these spirituals that he composed what is now one of the most popular symphonies in the world, entitled Symphony No. 9 in E minor, more commonly known as the New World Symphony. And you can hear this New World Symphony in the second movement of this symphonic work. The color of music. When I listened to it, wow, I felt blue, the color of rich blues and greens in my mind. It lifted my spirit, in other words, along with clear blue skies and some of that unimaginable beauty that this land had to offer. How am I doing so far? Okay, so I felt this beautiful by listening to this song, this rendition, the spiritual, and I'm going to share that with you in a moment. But I want to share a quote with you that Antoine Dvorak said. Now, he was so moved in his spirit, and that to me shows that Allah is always there, because a once African-American slave, who's now a free and a student of musical composition, is remembering that past that Imam Deen Mohammed just mentioned about. He remembered those traditions and that past, and he was singing the songs, and it touched a European who came over to this. Let's see what this new world is all about. It touched him in his soul so much that humanness that can never be destroyed, inshallah, mashallah, never be destroyed. It touched him so much until he composed a symphony around it. Wow. But this was a quote that Antoine Dvorak said, and I'm going to read it to you. He said, "I am convinced that the future of music of this country, meaning the New World, must be founded on what are called Negro melodies. These can be the foundation of a serious original school of composition to be developed in the United States. These beautiful and varied themes are the product of the soil. Oh boy, he didn't know, did he? Oh yeah, it was a product of the soil and a whole lot more. So they are the folk songs of America. And your composers must turn to them. Wow, how does that thing turn around like that? Yeah. Now, I'm going to play on the piano the theme called Going Home. Now, many of us may be familiar with this melody, and we think it's an original spiritual. But I found out that it is indeed it was Antoine Dvorak's interpretation of a spiritual. And once you hear it, you'll see he definitely had the components in place. And another composer, whose name was William Arms Fisher, he was a European, he decided to write words to it. So I'm not going to sing the words to this one, but I will play the theme that was in the New World Symphony of Antoine Dvorak, based on traditional spirituals that were sang to him by Harry T. Burleigh. So I'm going to move on over. And my piano students, we had a whole arrangement of this song, of this interpretation of this spiritual, Going Home. And too bad that we weren't able to get them here so that you could hear the whole thing. Because it boils down to this, the unique perspective of the African American voice. So we take this and we bring it and present something new and original and that hasn't been heard of in exactly the way that we do it. So that's what we have in our piano class. One of the sisters wrote something based on the Quran. I forget which verse that she used, and we have a reading of that. And it talks about the Suratul Mustaqim. It talks about that path of righteousness. And so we took that and then we arranged it in our class based on Antoine Dvorak's New World Symphony, the second movement, Going Home. So I'm going to play that melody for you now. I'm sorry. When it reaches in your soul, ain't nothing you can do about it. Let's submit. So I submit that reaches my soul. Oh, wow. I would just like to say, in my opinion, to me, one of the noblest and sublime forms of musical expression, to me, is symphonic orchestral music. So I would like to mention at least 3 of the most famous African American composers of symphonic orchestral music who have had their works performed by major orchestras. The student, remember I mentioned him, Harry T. Burleigh? He became a composer. William Grant Still, anybody heard of William Grant Still? Has a very large body of work. And the first African American woman to be recognized as a symphonic composer was Florence Beatrice Price. Here's a point to remember. When assimilating here our African ancestors and all the peoples here that came in the New World, in particular with isolating our African ancestors and the Europeans, our ancestors moving forward all the way up to the present day. Back from when we started, moving forward all the way to the present day, have gifted America with its only original musical forms, starting with sorrow songs, as I mentioned earlier, and they became later known as spirituals. Then we go into blues. Well, blues came from the field shouts and hollers, that ways of communication that our ancestors used to talk about the toils and the tribulations that they were going through. And we know that the spirituals had another part of their job that they were doing too. They were also, sending out messages sometimes for meetings, of ways to get away from out from under all of this toil and trouble and despair and hopelessness. They kept fighting. I just love people who don't stop fighting. I love it. So anyway, spirituals, blues, rhythm and blues, gospel, contemporary gospel, jazz. I'm just kind of scratching the surface a little bit, because we know that all of these genres that our ancestors all the way up to the present day have their little components to them too. Like jazz, there's smooth jazz, there's cool jazz, there's straight ahead jazz, and jazz fusion, jazz rock. So we kind of know that. But let me continue on. Rock and roll. I mean, this is America's original music. Cannot be denied. Rock and roll, soul, neo-soul, hip-hop, and rap. Okay? Let's not forget many of our, I'm going to just reiterate this again, many of our African ancestors were Muslims who were forced into Christianity, and yet were able to keep and achieve a unique musical perspective, humanity, spirituality, and voice that has dominated this country's musical landscape and influenced the world over up to this very, very day. It cannot be denied. The color of music, bright, sunny, clear, golden, the color of music. Taking some leaps forward to more recent history, people and musicians like James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Kool and the Gang, maybe Aretha Franklin, Earth, Wind and Fire, and Najee were either Muslims under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, or they were influenced by him. And they come right out and admit it. You read their histories. They're saying that they're proud of it. So the point I'm making is the unique perspective of the African American voice, and specifically the African American Muslim voice, is undeniably and inextricably oh, good. That was good. That was on the roll. Undeniably and inextricably interwoven into the American cultural fabric. Remember I said before, they plan and Allah plans. And Allah is the best of planners. I know they had no idea what was coming down the road. In 1975, Imam Deen Mohammed, peace and blessings upon him, opened up the culture and placed it in its proper position in the community, along with education, politics, business, and culture. the four legs for a properly balanced community. He opened the doors with the group known as the Inviters to Truth. That was led by Sister Deen, Mohammed, peace and blessings be upon her. And yours truly, I was in there too. Kamilah Furqan was a member of that group. After that, the culture grew very fast, and people were hungry and with expression. And there's another brother I want to mention. His name is Brother Shamsuddin Sadiq. Anybody remember Brother Shamsuddin Sadiq? Yes, he wrote some beautiful songs. I used to, he would call me over and to see what he was doing, and he would sit down and play the beautiful words and melodies that came out of that brother's mind. I said, who taught you how to play like that? He said, nobody. I mean, he taught himself. He was self-taught. And he, the chords and things, I said, my goodness, I was in college and I was learning about the 7th and the 11th and all of this and the 13th chords, and he just, and just playing them. What a gift. And not to mention the words. I gave some information to Sister Dr. Lynn and her husband with their museum with some of the lyrics. And I have one of his CDs with some of the songs on there that he wrote. They're really beautiful. Let me continue. After Brother Shamsuddin Sadiq, I want to say that the culture grew fast, and I would be remiss if I did not mention Imam Galib. Peace and blessings upon him as well. You see that right over there I was performing? He gifted that to the Mosque. Wasn't that beautiful? What a giving spirit. And he oftentimes, when he come to Chicago, I was like, he's my big brother, So he, sometimes little sisters or little brothers or sisters, they can be kind of pesky. So I said, like Imam Galib. He was always smiling and very gracious. But I think sometimes I said, was I that little pesky sister? But he was gracious, and we would do some things together and for the community, and you all saw that. And I was always very thankful of his generosity in that way, because he didn't have to do that. He really didn't. But so I thank him for that. So Brother Galib, Sister Suad Al-Amin, who's done some great music. So these are some of the early trailblazers, and some of us are still around kicking. So where do we go from here? Edward Aziz, the spoken word artist. Okay. Very. Okay, come on, give me one. Thank you. As I said, those were some of the early trailblazers that we had, and there were so many more. When I was in New Jersey, I met so many beautiful, I don't want to say Muslims who were in the arts. There was a brother who was dancing. And, oh, wow. For culture night, and the way he could dance, it was just mesmerizing to watch it. There was a sister with some spoken word, extremely moving. The sisters with the singing, another sister was singing. Brother Kachibi Abdullah, flutist, a multi-instrumentalist. He was there, a composer. So where do we go from here with this unique perspective of the African American voice that inshallah will not be denied? Under the teachings and legacy of Imam Warith Muhammad and Warith Muhammad II, alhamdulillah, and the Mosque cares established by his father, I would like to see the African American Muslim voice come together with a few dedicated believers. I don't want a whole lot of people. Now, I don't want no whole lot of people, because then when there's a lot of people, you got all these opinions, and then it just kind of bogs down. So I would like a few dedicated to the core believer's soul to begin the work of a Muslim production company. to protect and treat fairly our Muslim musicians, singers, dancers, artists, etc. Oh yeah, that's what I would really like to see. So hopefully, because you know what's happening now, a lot of them may become vulnerable to the big competing recording and production companies that we already know they don't have their best interests at heart. Don't take that, ain't rocket science. We know how many of them, of their own, who go that route end up biting the dust. Another one bites the dust. I mean, it's so sad. So, so we don't want them to be as vulnerable to those big competing recording and production companies. We must, inshallah, we must do this and support the Mosque Cares. Why not?
I agree.
I don't get it.
I agree. Why not?
We can't say, as I say, this is my little catchphrase my husband knows. I say we can't drink the sauce. As artists, we can't be taken in by the razzle-dazzle of the entertainment culture as we see today. Don't drink the sauce, don't drink it. They offer it to you. No, thank you. I have my own sauce. It's the Mosque Cares. So, oh, I unplugged myself, didn't I? Okay. Where I go? Right there? Okay. I'm really at the conclusion of my talk this afternoon. I tried to kind of stretch it out a little bit because I'm kind of nervous. But in conclusion,
do you have any history you want to share? Like reminisce a little bit about? Because I'm curious about that. I remember as a little boy riding in the car with my father and turning on the radio, and I would hear you all.
Wow.
And we arrived coming from up Stony Island down 87th Street. Then we arrived on at what was it, 53rd? I mean 73rd and Stony Island. Yes. Get out the car, and then I see you, Sister Zaire, a couple of other. I remember Wali Ali. He was a pop star, and there's a brother. He owns a coin laundromat. He speaks with a real proper accent, and I used to talk to him before my father passed so often on the phone that he got to forgive me for not remembering his name. There was a brother that played. I think he may have sang with you all. Do you remember any of the names of the male that were in the group of the Fighters of Truth? They were transitional. Or
some were transitional. One who stayed with us for a while was a drummer, Carl. Ugda. He's still here in the land of the living, alhamdulillah. And another brother wrote some of the songs when we had those concerts of the mother-daughter and the father-son concert with your dad. His name was Abdullah Mohammed. He was kind of a tall. I meant to bring the pictures up. He was kind of a tall brother, and he played flute and he wrote songs. And there was a brother on guitar. I can't remember his name. He was kind of dark skinned. And we had another brother on who played congas. He stayed with us a long time. The conga player, Zaki. Yeah, he was in the wheelchair. Zaki. Yeah. He recently passed last year or something like that.
Zaki and his brother comes here for Junior, Abdul Malik. Imam Abdul Malik. He's here. Yeah.
Yeah.
His brother.
So some.
Johnson. I know he sang.
No, he
sang with us in the Islamic ensemble.
That's what it was. Okay. Islamic ensemble. I remember that too.
So with the.
That's what I remember. I remember we had a lot of. We had some really great musicians, singers, and huge talent on Stony Island.
Right, we did, yeah. There was a choir. There was a kind of that's the ensemble, and I know Sister Esther was in it, and yeah.
And wasn't Nathaniel Omar in it?
He did. He was the
play. He was the play.
Production of the play, and we sung in the play, and he had some dynamite songs for history and stuff.
She sang.
That's how he was one of the first writers for our newspaper.
Yeah, I
He would
remember
go
that,
all the way
'cause I
down
took a
south
class with
and
him in
everything.
Carolina School.
Right.
I didn't know he sang.
Yeah.
But he didn't really sing. He wrote the
He wrote the
play
lyrics.
and he wrote the lyrics, and we sung them.
It seems like there's more reason now, listening to everyone, it seems like it's more reason to incorporate our memories with the museum.
Yeah.
That way, we can pull from the museum and this production company actually say, okay, well, with the support of Mosqueers and us supporting it back, we could bring this production company into one thing.
Oh, that's right.
My question is, how do we help support a production company? What should we be looking at doing right now to help get this done?
What I would like to see is just people like yourself and I just kind of brainstorming and maybe kind of Googling. We don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely. Googling production companies and how we want ours to be unique and different from some that are already in place. What we want to place emphasis on when we have artists come to us, what we're, that kind of thing. But structurally, how to set it up, basically, just take a look at that, at a basic outline of a structure of a production company, and then put that in place, change things that may need to be changed, well, we won't really need that or this, and then go from there. And then when it comes to the type of artists that we want to reach out to, then that might be another phase of the production company of how to reach certain artists that we want to come in and take a look at what we're doing and see if they want to, be a part of it. And then we can begin to work out all the nuts and bolts about, pay, money, who gets what, all that. That's why it got to be the right people. You know how.
You have our support. If you ever want to do a talent show, down the road, anything, you have our support.
Alhamdulillah, thank you.
I think in that it always has to be, I see our younger artists, they don't seem to kind of, get, they struggling, they trying, but even with the lyrics and what they come up with, I guess because they have been told and they don't see, like you said, when Imam Mohammed started, because Imam Mohammed told us entertainment is what has taken our lives, and that's what's going to restore it.
Right.
So we have people that's close, because they used to tell us over at the mosque, when we was there, Imam had named the culture night. We had people tell us we couldn't dance, where you pray and all kind of crazy stuff, right? But our younger people are struggling because people are telling them it's un-Islamic to do this, that, and another. But they know this talent is there, and they struggling. And when I hear some of them, you can hear the voices. They have the talent, but seem like they can't develop it.
Yeah.
Like they need, how you have that spirit, you get, seriously. So they feel they can't let loose or bring out that natural gift that Allah has given them.
That's why.
They over emphasis. We got all this confusion about what is Islam and what is culture.
Right.
African American people, that's part of your
part of your
whole
life.
life.
Part of your life.
Is
Right.
a spirit that developed, like you did the history and stuff. So they struggling with that because somebody gonna tell them, oh, you don't supposed to be doing that.
I think our leaders need to address that.
Right.
Because you shouldn't have two identities.
Right.
You have to have one identity. And then that one identity, whichever one wins, that's who you are. So if you're a negative person, your identity is going to be negative. It's going to be of the world. If that's your influence, if that's you want to go with that. But as a believer or Muslim, you have to come all the way and embrace your Muslim, your believer that's in you. And then the lyrics will come out natural. I heard Imam Muhammad. We'll look for, I got some people that archive. They can find some where Imam Muhammad addressed some of these situations.
Right.
What is that? Wasn't it right? I just want to say it.
I remember one.
Abdullah, say his name. He's in Alexandria, Louisiana right now. Was he? I don't know how she found it on her phone, or anything.
I have his phone number.
I remember one of the tapes that CDs that I have of your father. I think Imam Elam gave it to us in class one day, in a piano class, that he was addressing some students. And one of the students asked him about music and what kind of music should be acceptable, which kind of addresses what you're talking about too. And I'm paraphrasing, but from my memory, I can remember hearing on the CD, he said that we have to embrace and perform and entertain, do what we're doing as if Allah is right there in the audience with you. Allah is in the audience with you. And that you don't necessarily want to get the people into a falling down out spirit. You don't want them to go there. You want to inspire them, and at the same time entertain them. But you want to inspire their intellect and their spirit. You don't want them falling down fainting and then when they come through, they say, oh, "What I do? What I do?" So
That was given to you by Frederick Kamika. He,
oh, okay.
with all the youth and the children, he also
Yeah.
did some lectures.
Thank you. So that kind of addresses what you were saying. They need to be more educated again, and the Mosque is certainly the place to come to get that grounding. And in the production companies of the type of artists we're looking for, if we can address the type of artists we're looking for, and I think we're going to draw those people.
Yeah.
And the other ones who want to drink the sauce, oh, let's pray for them. They'll come around. We'll pray for them.
Was there a brother named Abdullah Rahim that invited us to truth? Abdullah Rahim?
I-
'Cause
I'm
he
not-
might have changed his name.
Yeah.
That might not have been his name back then.
I remember Abdullah Muhammad. I do not remember Abdullah Rahim. I stayed with the Inviters to Truth until Sister Dia moved to Oakland. So
What was her husband's name? He was a part of it.
she when I met Sister Dia, she was Sister Patricia at that time, and I think she had divorced her first husband. They had divorced, and then when she as Inviters to Truth opened up with the grace and mercy of Imam Deen Mohammed. This brother I'm speaking about, Abdullah Muhammad, they got married. Okay. And so that was her husband that I knew of. The other, her first husband, I never had a chance to meet him.
That might be him, because I never saw his face, but he called me at least once a week. Like,
Okay.
for years. Yeah.
Oh, I thought so. Okay, so, yes, sister.
I wanted to know that when you were talking about the color of music,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this movie that came out called The Green Book.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. This musician,
Mm-hmm.
what year, do you know what, that was modern, right? That wasn't back in the 60s. We still had the Jim Crow laws and so forth. 60s.
The 60s, yeah. Yeah, I did see that movie as well.
Right.
And he was a prodigy, a classically trained pianist.
I was wondering if it's.
And once you accept the history, what's down in you, you never know how Allah is going to use that to move the people. How He's going to that you come in contact with. But you first have to accept it. You can't be afraid of it, and you can't say, well, like you said, is that Muslim? If your intention is right, and your intention is to please Almighty God Allah, you will be you. Yes.
And two, if we accept what Allah blessed Imam Muhammad with,
Mm-hmm.
then that's what we follow. Because those things were so natural and hit your soul and your heart and things and stuff like that. But other people bring all these questions to you. I don't know if you remember when we was having a culture night in Deen. This was when it was breakdancing. You all remember breakdancing? You get out
He was into
and
that.
so Saudi was doing that.
Mhm.
And people, they all upset and
Well,
stuff.
I wouldn't pay that any mind
But
at
ma'am
all.
said, I would rather for him to be here with us
Mhm.
than be out on the street.
Mhm.
So these are the kind of things we have to understand that Allah has put things naturally.
He actually sold a track that he
Oh,
produced,
yeah.
and I still hear it every now and then, like in the house genre of music,
Mhm.
which they say started in Chicago, or New
He
York.
could play the piano naturally. I mean, Sean
Yeah.
was talented.
House was the bed. And he so I don't know how much money he got, but it was popular. I still hear it on the radio. I can remember the tune.
Mm.
We put it on one of the W.D. Muhammad's and guests. So when you hear that
I
piano,
remember
that piano music that comes on at the beginning of
Mm.
W.D. Muhammad's guest, that was Sadi's track. So,
And their whole family is talented in the arts, because they artists,
Mhm.
yeah, oh yeah, I got it. Yeah, the family. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we were a culture.
Poets.
We were strong in culture, and inshallah we'll get that back. As long as we put our focus on it, put
Right.
our heart and
In the right
minds in
place.
it,
Yeah.
it'll come back to the community.
Yeah.
inshallah.
Yeah. So, I